Hi, welcome to a new idea that we have over here at Tempor Mag. For the longest time, I wanted to make a podcast called the Footnotes podcast, where the kind of the open thoughts and the kind of the interior monologue and kind of feelings and little interviews and little snippets and things like that end up not making it into our publication because it just by nature, it's, a long form, highly edited format. That this is basically the shorthand notes for it. I always thought that there was something missing, so to speak, with a missed opportunity, so to speak, with that particular this particular idea that we're kind of start now amid this COVID-19 crisis, where we're all kind of locked in. We don't ultimately know what's going to happen. We can kind of see it within the news, the growth, the kind of the exponential growth curve and how it's happening as testing is starting to come in, and what we have to do to ultimately prepare and deal with it and what the guidelines ultimately are, because it feels like there are relatively little. Like, what do you do at the grocery store? What do you do when you need to go for a walk or a run or something like that outside? And it just got me thinking that a lot of these thoughts are playing out inside my head, and you can, vouch, my wife can vouch for me on this one, that I talk to myself all the time. So I might as well put an audio device in front of my mouth and just start kind of talking my way through things. And I think audio ends up working out in this way. Could tie to the website. I could also have opportunities to photograph if I feel like I need to photograph. I can just take out a camera and just photo, like if I got to go walk the dog in a little kind of corner or whatever, that these end up being like the little viewports of my mind or my inner workings of my head and my anxieties and whatnot, as this is all kind of playing out in front of us, without kind of a past or a future. We're kind of just stuck within the moments of where we are. And that's kind of how, this publication ultimately started. So, some episodes might be 5 minutes. Some episodes might be 45 minutes or an hour or whatever. Will they be mundane? Yeah, sure. They're going to be mundane. Are they going to be, meandering? Yes, they are. And that's kind of the intention, trying to maybe give a space, for our particular monologue in this circumstance that can be referenced later at another time or maybe by somebody else. So without further ado, I'll give you the first episode, which is basically me walking around the lake that's around where we live, and felt like it was sort of the end of the week for me, dealing with work and just trying to focus on everything that I possibly could without without thinking about the outside world as much as I could, because we're basically just locked in our little apartment here with our son, with our computers, with Outlook, with video conferencing, with the challenges that we're ultimately facing with it, which are fucking trivial as all get out, but that's what we're dealing with. And so you can listen to my week at a weekend review, walking around a lake. So here it is. Enjoy. What a great way to maybe start that podcast idea for Tempor Mag. Tempor Mag. I'm out for a social distancing walk. We used to live in Houston, but now we live in the Metro Orlando area, which right now we live in a place that's around a bunch of resorts that are kind of empty. It's near my wife's work. These days I'm kind of more remote. I teach at a community college here, and then I kind of do freelance work and kind of bump around and do that type of thing. And I'm 100% online teaching now at this point. I had a pretty fairly big semester where it was half online, half face-to-face. Now it's all online. And I feel like that transition is ultimately working out for me. So this week, my wife, she's been remote working for the house, and generally, it's all kind of working out for now.
I'm taking a Friday break and going for a walk around the lake that's near our apartment. And I'm not running into anybody, so I'm socially distant. I'm not seeing anybody in the resort townhomes that are available for rent. Nobody's out. I see cars on the street, and they're probably doing what they have to do for essential work. And that helicopter that you hear overhead is not a martial law helicopter. It is maybe a resort helicopter. It's yellow. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what all that is. But yeah, it's empty. Like, we live right next to this, like, I don't know what it is. I've read some articles in the news about it, but they're building like a brand new mini billion-dollar theme park that's like right next to our house, where they are basically terraforming this entire plot of land and like regraded it with the same trucks that you would see, like, you know, the Alberta tar sands, you know, like where they're like stripping the Alberta tar sands, like with those trucks. And they're basically just like grading the land and making lakes for a theme park out there. All that's on standstill. It's a fairly interesting time. It makes me think about some things, like, I don't know. I just want to, maybe this is just an attempt of maybe, like, for me, for this particular idea here, is that it basically takes this magazine project that we've been working on and, I don't know, one, kind of shifts us into more of an introspective space that I have been in for the last few years working on it, like long form writing, but then ending up just kind of documenting my train of thought. I feel like as the future performers of the remote work industry, you know, our ability to engage our public with our performances is probably a necessary outcome out of all of this, you know? Which leads me to think about a couple of things, really. Like, this week has taught me that I think the people that are working right now with the economy and the Dow Jones Industrial Average or whatever, you know, the economy feeling like it's on the brink of Armageddon. You know, talking with my brother who works in the oil industry and seems to think that he's definitely worried in that avenue. And I don't know. I kind of get a sense of dread and anxiety with a lot of small business people. I have a degree of anxiety that I ultimately feel about all of this. And if you hear wind, I'm sorry, I'm walking. This is the way it's going to be. There's a degree of anxiety and dread about a lot of this. You know, how our livelihoods are ultimately tied to everybody else around us. And I'm just focusing on that. Like, I don't know, I got a chunk of weeks left in a semester, and supposedly I have some summer teaching lined up. And Jenny's work is seemingly like it's okay for now, but you know, I just choose to think about the things that I can think about at this point. And if somebody happens to tap me on the shoulder tomorrow and say, "You're out," then I'm ultimately going to have to make peace with that any way I can. You know, and I refuse to, I refuse to be panicked in this situation. I've got a job to do, and I'm going to do my job. I've got projects that I can do. I'm going to do my projects. And that's about all that we can do about any of this situation, you know? Like, I'm going for a walk, an empty walk out in the middle of the sun, get some sunlight, get a little bit of exercise. I'm not running right now because I chose to talk instead of go for a run. And I think maybe this will work out. I mean, I'm about to contradict myself when I say this. I do have a mild degree of fears. I think about adjunct faculty that have to teach their classes without knowledge of skill sets. Like they spent their lives learning a particular skill set and course curriculum and things that interest them, and now all of a sudden they're being thrust in this environment. Only reason why I feel like I'm doing well in it is because I'm trained in this environment. I'm trained in digital media, and have the ability to think about it, have the ability to tell stories using it. I have the ability to, I happen to be lucky enough to be in the middle of this stuff. I just, somebody who's better suited, specialized as like a history instructor or an English teacher or a math teacher. Like, how are they ultimately going to be engaging in this environment? And, I don't know. And then the flip side of that is like what students, I'm dealing with a chunk of students that are having tremendous difficulty keeping up. They don't have a computer at home, or their computer can't run the software. And then we're ultimately thrusting them into an environment where they're having to keep up, like there's a tremendous equity problem. It's a tremendous equity problem with like full-time versus adjunct staff, like, I don't know. I'm gladly using my resources in this manner, hopefully figuring out what the next market is going to be. However, is that, back of my mind, I can't help but to think, is that a unwise feeling at this point? I mean, again, what choice do I have? I want to feel like I'm doing good, but at the end of it, hey duckies. I want to feel like it's all fair at the end of it. And I wonder in the back of my mind how all that's going to work out. If this is the new normal for every business, like we're all supposed to be panicked, working 7 days a week remotely, trying to do what we can because we're worried, and we're giving productivity where we can. And I feel like, looking at my wife and looking at me, it's been double, triple work than normal this week, and it's probably going to keep up with it for the foreseeable future. And I think that that's something to think about. I just hope that we all start thinking that we're interconnected rather than thinking that we're separate. Because we are. I feel like I'm doing the best I can to try to interconnect the two face-to-face teams that I'm responsible for and the two online teams that I'm responsible for. So I'm ending up having to make sure that a group of kids are in contact with one another with the changes that need to be made. I was social distancing and I thought I was about to step on a snake. I'm sorry. I was walking out in the woods. Yeah. Well, it's all good. I think that those are some concerns that I have. I think those concerns are important. I'm walking by a resort villa, and there's a handful of people at the swimming pool. I guess doing what they can do. I don't know. On one level, I don't think that there probably is enough social distancing from what I see. And I think people are kind of still in disbelief about the whole thing. But, there should be an over-under on how many days before we're on government-mandated lockdown. And that's okay. If it happens, it happens, My son is doing well with all of this. He's been a great kid. I also, one thought I have in mind here is that we listen so much to, I feel like we worry so much about the negative aspects of things. We should focus on, what we see good with our particular families and around us. Like my son, for instance, he ended up having his school closed, like his VPK program in Florida. Here they have voluntary pre-K, and basically the state pays for that section of time to basically give him kind of a pre-kindergarten environment to, so he knows what public school is going to be like, in August when he hopefully goes to kindergarten and this is over with. That his program kind of got shut down because of all this, but he's doing amazing. We have him watching PBS Kids, and he's getting to watch his shows, and it kind of reminds me of back in the day where I was a latchkey kid and I had to watch like PBS, and that's kind of what got me through like science class and like middle school. I never did any of the homework or read the book. They gave us this stupid textbook to read, and I would just watch Bill Nye the Science Guy and ace all the tests. Like my son has programming available that I don't know that he's really interested in. He loves like the wild kratts, he loves like snakes and wildlife and birds, and knows all the names of the birds that we walk by when we like go walk around this lake by ourselves. And that blows my mind because I don't. I really enjoy where he is. He has kind of independent time. Like he sees mommy and daddy working, and then he himself is finding tasks and things to do. And I find that to be absolutely brilliant, rather than kind of this feeling that structure is not there. He's kind of having the ability to kind of take a breath and march to his own imagination at this point. And I think that's brilliant. I think that's a great thing for him, provided I think for us, we have an eye on him, within our apartment while we're working, and kind of stop and give quick breaks to give him time. And that was like the whole thing about Tempor in the first place, that we started the project, because we wanted to give him time that, at the very least, I can speak for myself, that I wanted to write about topics, but I also wanted to have a creative working practice that was geared towards maybe giving him time to see the things that I never got to see as a kid. I think about my dad working like crazy and, not having any time for any of us, not having time for family. And I don't know if it was the fact that he was trying to get away from mom or what, but none of that was a very enjoyable experience. None of it was there. And I think it's on us as parents to kind of give him that, and at the very least, me as a writer, I don't know, I want to provide an account of maybe what I was thinking about. Holy shit. So one thing that I've noticed in the last couple days on this walk, Universal, it's like basically we live on Universal Boulevard, just before the convention center. If you ever want to pull this up on a map, and if this ends up getting on a website, I'll end up making a map, or I'll end up doing some photo to kind of outline where I am on this walk. But there's this lot that was full of trucks that a big media company ultimately stored its freight trucks, its trailers and things, right? And it had hundreds and hundreds of trailers in this empty lot in between like all of the big hotels and things. And they're all gone. They all have been shipped to a central location. So people are ultimately consolidating their assets to better protect them. I find that to be a telling thing, how the movements are ultimately being made right now. That something is relatively simple and commonplace is a storage facility for 18-wheeler tractor trailers not being used or being moved to some location somewhere. Monarch butterfly. Beautiful. Yeah. So Marco, back to Marco, I think just being able to focus on him and giving him that mixture of playtime and space and, I don't know, like time for introspection, is a good thing. I remember that as a kid. I remember having that at some point because my parents were struggling and dealing with failed marriage, business that was rocky. And I don't know, at the end of it, like, I just hope I have the discipline to know that when that tap on the shoulder ultimately happens and we've got to figure out how hard this is ultimately all going to get, that I can just kind of take a breath and be like, it's not a big deal, not having the stress of the moment, overtake me, kind of. I think of that contagion of anxiety is much the same thing as we're kind of afraid of a microscopic organism that we don't have antibodies for to ultimately make us sick, And maybe, I think about my mom and dad again. They're like, in their 70s and early 80s, they're immunocompromised. This is probably not going to be a good thing for them. I think about it. I try to have conversations with them. I had a conversation with them a week ago where they basically told my brother, like, he must have a sick sense of humor, like that he's trying to scare us like that. And then, like, lo and behold, we're here, like they weren't prepared. They didn't have any food stocked up, or their medications were in low supply. And, then you're dealing with like the hoarding aspect of panic, I just want to breathe at the end of it. And I find, like, this week, that whole meditation thing, like we'll do it together. How's this? Let's just stop real quick, guys. Okay. You're going to breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Let me do myself for 2 cycles. Okay, I'm back. I just want to be able to have that level of calm for my family. And Tempor was like one of those things during a really rocky period of time for us, or me, my wife, me, Marco, where I had basically been, unhappy running a family business that I didn't really want to have part of. And I just kind of felt a vague sense of obligation to help out. And I think it was a lot of things that were ultimately happening at once. Mom got cancer. Dad was kind of getting sick. They were estranged, and, kind of held it together for about 6 or 7 years or so, doing things that I really didn't want to do. Further projects, I'll kind of write more and more about those experiences, because I think for me personally, kind of writing about those experiences really just kind of gets the shit out, and I can just get it out of my system and not think about it anymore. And the more that I get to write about those topics ends up making me a calmer person. and I don't know. I just, like, it was a period of time where I ended up having to kind of give myself a level of discipline that I feel like I'm more prepared for now as a human being. Like, it's not going to work out for, I mean, it's not going to always work out for me and my wife and my son or you or anybody else. But it's like what you can do with that adversity that keeps your brain there, I think, and keeps you calm and measured and learning is probably the best thing. And for me, the magazine does that. The putting it together kind of catalogs what I'm thinking about. And what's kind of rad right now is, if we're talking about this as an editorial design exercise, it's not just the fucking magazine. You know, it can be me venting in real time my thoughts on this recorder, putting it in Adobe Audition, and then having it kind of uploaded to listen to with a website or whatever else. And I find, to me, that's even better, because I don't have to deal with the printing costs or the robbing Peter to pay Paul aspect of like what print is at this point, because it's paper, it's labor, it's expensive, and nobody wants to pay for it. So if you want to give it to them for free and give them more for free and find other avenues of being able to, disseminate information and content to people, as much as I love print, as much as it ends up, for me, I think I want to go into more of a digital direction, because I feel like we're all headed that way. You know, we're all going to be, all of our work environment is pretty much going to be what we've been doing for the last week, which has been, you know, wife working a job on a laptop, on a company laptop, dad's teaching classes on his computer in another room, and Marco's, you know, watching PBS Kids with digital antenna in his room and coloring and doing whatever. Like, we're in a small apartment making all of this work, you know. Hopefully the bandwidth stays up for us to be able to talk to one another and be able to give ourselves, you know, information and love and sharing and compassion, you know. And yeah, it's post-apocalyptic out here. It's so beautiful. It's like you have the chance to bait. Oh, that's fucking rad. An eagle, dead fucking serious. An eagle caught a tilapia out of this pond, and I watched him dive bomb it. Into the lake and grab it with his talon feet, and he just flew away, and he's just going to town eating it in the air. That was the coolest thing ever. Anyway, it's a different experience walking and talking, as opposed to what I normally do is try to crush out 5-mile runs and listen to Motley Crue albums. I feel a little bit calmer. I feel fine. I don't know how long this is going to be, but yeah, that's the other thing. Like, you end up having like the podcasting hosting services and stuff, and they're only like, you can start off free, and then they're only like $12.99 a month or whatever. And I personally love listening to people talk. Like, if I'm working and doing mindless tasks, I pretty much just listen to people rant and talk. If I'm cooking, I normally do that, because when I'm cooking, I probably end up having about 2 hours a night of prep time that I have to do cooking, and I might as well listen to somebody else. Maybe I listen to music sometimes, but I also like listening to various news and people that I like listening to on podcasts. So that's a good idea. It's a pretty good idea. It's a good starting point. I have no clue how this is ultimately going to turn out. I think that's the brilliant aspect about it. As a photographer, visually walking around, I'm catching scenes right now that I don't have a camera, that later on I might come back and grab content for this walk, so you can ultimately see what I see on this particular walk that might be interesting. So like, from the birds to the detritus to the landscapes, and how utterly fucking scary and devoid of people it is it's beautiful at the same time. It's like the palettes, like when I teach art appreciation, or when I'm teaching design theory or color theory in class, one thing that I like to talk about is what analogous color schemes ultimately do, which is it makes people believe that everything is all right. So there's a Mary Cassatt painting that I kind of talk about, and I forget the name of it for the life of me. My short-term memory sucks, or my whatever you call it, where it's, I'm not a word learner, I'm a visual learner, where Mary Cassatt painted this scene of a lady in a boat with a baby, and so there's like a rower on the boat, and they're going across this lake. It's like a 19th century painting, and I basically pose this question to students: how would you feel about that baby's life in this painting if it were painted in a complementary color scheme? Highly dramatic orange and like a orange and blue with the browns mixed together, or red and green, or that type of a color scheme. Of like, would you be worried about that baby's life? And the answer would obviously be yeah. Like if it's fucking dramatic like superhero shit, or it's kind of apocalyptic in its moodiness and foreboding, through a complementary color scheme, it's going to make you be really worried about that baby falling into that water, right? But choosing an analogous color scheme, so in this case, like the blues and greens that are closer together on the color wheel, you end up making believe that baby's in an interstitial point between two shores, but that boat's gonna get to the other point, it's gonna be fine. And what I feel right now in the scene that I'm looking at is, it looks like a fucking Central Florida, like, economic nightmare, like, I have a good view of a chunk of resorts that are around and hotels that are empty. The resorts don't have the normal flow of people. This area where I run in mornings before I get started with my day usually has the traffic of people that are coming from conferences. Like Microsoft just had a conference here that had the tech community out here, that I'd see people walking down this with their badges and stuff from that event. And nobody is here. I'm just walking around this kind of floodplain, kind of grassy area, and nothing is around. Nobody is here. And yet, the stunning blues and greens of this scene makes me feel like everything's gonna be all right, And I know it's gonna be all right. It's gonna be fine. My grandfather had polio. It's a good story. That's a good story that my dad always tells me, that he was a teacher. I think he was a teacher. Was he a teacher? I don't know. I'll have to check on that one. See, again, the beauty of this is I can talk out of my ass and not have key information. I honestly don't know what he did. I don't know if he was a teacher or he worked for a railroad. I know my grandmother worked for the railroad and had a pension and all that stuff, and she was a cool lady. But anyway, he had polio. He had one arm that was shriveled up, and to think about the fact that all that was commonplace, that people had illnesses and had to deal with this sort of thing, and illnesses were a part of life, that my parents' generation saw it growing up, but then it was eradicated when they were alive and through their life, and they didn't have to think about it. And now I'm in my late 30s or early 40s, and we have to think about it again. And my parents are at the end of their life, kind of like, well, shit, we're back to this life again that we remember. So it's weird how like the life cycle ends up kind of bringing key points and information back to us in a way that's that it kind of fucks with our short-term thinking on things. And it's a way I always like to think about it. I try to like think more long-term, that most of us are thinking in like 1 year periods of time. Like, oh yeah, no, I hope my 2020 is going to go great. But maybe a corporation has their next 3 to 5 years figured out financially at best. You know, if they're cash strapped, they're thinking hand to mouth like everybody else is. But really, like, our lives take these tremendous arcs over time. It's almost to the point where we're completely different people from 5 years ago to 5 years in the future. And I wonder what type of person I'm going to be in 6 months, a year, 18 months, especially with something that's life-altering like this. Like, something I listened to the other day is like, you know, this might not be the apocalypse, so to speak, in terms of the end of civilization, not in a biblical sense. I don't want to bring up Jesus. I don't tend to think about that stuff in terms of the meaning. Think of it more kind of pragmatically genetic, like that there's organisms that mutate faster than we do, like on infinite timelines, timescales. And then, you know, we are at the mercy of it. You know, we're at the mercy of it, of how our bodies can handle this living, breathing environment that we live in, that we're connected to one another rather than separate by ourselves, braving all of this. You know, for that reason, I think about, like, if this is not the end of the world, this is certainly a dress rehearsal for something that could be far worse. And it's an opportunity to us to drastically fix our approaches towards things and how we treat other people. We can either go that way, or we can just kind of say, oh, well, fuck it. You know, like, we can get these fuckers like so ramped up and scared, they're going to work double and triple for us remotely. And we'll just do that, you know, just keep them at the house all crammed in and shut in, where they're working for us like 60, 70, 80 hours a week from home and getting good content out. And then they don't have the ability to like let loose or have a vacation or have a comfortable life, you know, and then we don't have to pay for like the real estate aspect of this, you know, we don't have to pay for a big cubicle farm to put them in or whatever else. Like, the cubicles are at their house, you know, let's just do that. You know, on one end, I can't help but just to think in my head that, you know, that we could very well be so grotesque that we're going to do that to people. At best, the best case scenario, I'm thankful for my home cubicle hell that we have going. There's some camaraderie, it's fun. But that's week 1. What's week 2, week 3? What's year 1, year 2, year 3? What happens when my personal computer dies? I don't have enough money to get another one. These are all the fucking things that I've been dealing with the last few years as a freelancer and an adjunct teacher. You know, at best, I'm lucky to have all this stuff and being able to I just built my own PC. I have the mind and the educational capability to do that. But what about other people? You know, how are they handling this stuff? And, you know, that's a concern of mine. Okay, I think that was a good walk and talk. What I feel like I want to do is I kind of want to do these walks and talks and get a bunch of shit out of my system and maybe put them up as I have something to rant or think, or kind of I get it when I have the emotional feeling to do so. I'm going to post these and put them up. And this very well might be my first episode of a podcast here. Just, it depends wholly on, you know, time and the space that I can put out, you know, and I've got to do that research. But yeah, and I'm probably not even really going to fucking edit this thing either. You're just going to be listening to my fucking train of thoughts here. And hopefully it was a fun journey for wherever you ultimately are that you want to listen to this or listen to parts of it. So I'm going to turn this thing off, and we can consider this week 1. What's the time? It's 12:20 p.m. Friday, March 20th, 2020. See where we are next week, fellas and ladies and everybody in between. And I love all of you. Love everybody. Love everybody out there from the bottom of my heart. T'animal, y'all.